Thank you, Mike. Now, Mr. Veres, you are the first to speak as an objector. You will be followed by Colin Campbell, the agent, and then by the Ward Councillors. So please proceed. You have 3 minutes. The bell will be struck after 2.5 minutes, so don't stop, but you only got 30 seconds left.
Good morning, I am Fernando. I am here on representation of the residents of Great Northern Road, not only on my own interest, to ask for the rejection of this application. We believe there are many solutions which haven't been looked at to mitigate these noise levels. A bit about the history of the development. The developer has consistently ignored the planning conditions throughout the planning, design or construction stages, and it can be shown as a lack of evidence. There is no evidence showing there is a holistic approach to mitigate as far as possible, as the standard says, the noise on the balconies. So the developer has completely ignored this condition. Our experience, I bought the flat with my pregnant wife on June 2016. We thoroughly enjoyed the summer on our balconies, our private balconies, and late 2016, as you may be aware, the road was open to traffic. And unfortunately, this past summer, 2017, I haven't been able to spend a single evening with my baby daughter or even alone on my private balcony. The noise levels, according to the survey submitted by the developer, shows a staggering 4 times louder noise than the one recommended by the World Health Organization, which is 40 decibels. They also say that 55 decibels should be an interim target. 4 times louder. Any noise louder on average, so that's the average only. Any noise louder than 55 decibels consistently, I have submitted the report, shows that there are risk of infarcts on the population. It's very serious, this. Now the developer is trying to remove the condition that they have never intended to comply with. They are basing that on inaccurate surveys, the 2 first ones, and false arguments. The balconies are primary leisure spaces for us. The balconies, they may be small, but the flat is so small as well. I put the savings of my life in those flats. The balcony is 10% of the gross internal area of the flat. It's half the space I have in my living room. Half of it is the balcony. It's very important. Therefore, if now they say the balconies are not to be used as primary leisure space, either they missold the flats, or if they reject that, and they keep saying that it's acceptable, we will lose a massive quality of life and value of the flats. Therefore, we request to reject the proposal because we think there are many elements which haven't been looked at. For example, not only mitigate the noise of the balcony, but also enhance the landscaping, review the asphalt type that the road has, and please remove those stones that form the speed bumps, because they are the roughest they have been used. They haven't been used in any other speed bump in Cambridge. They are the noisiest speed bumps we have in Cambridge. Have a look at the pictures if there are any. So all of those all of those actions may bring the 3 decibels to 10 or 12, which is a very significant amount. Decibels, the scale of decibels is that for every 10 decibels you have a noise twice as loud. We are talking about very serious noise levels here. Therefore, we beg you to help us to force the developer to commit with his obligation. Otherwise, what is the proof of a planning condition? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, Colin Campbell.
Thank you. My name is Colin Campbell. I'm the head of planning at Hill. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee and to hopefully correct some misunderstandings or perhaps misconceptions. We completely reject the suggestion that we've simply ignored the noise issue and that we haven't engaged on this matter. We've engaged on this from the outset since we became involved in the development. You need to be careful in terms of some of the number of figures. Where figures like 80 decibels have been quoted, those are the maximum levels. The guidelines are based on averages, so you need to be looking at the average noise level when you're making comparisons against those figures. We've taken a number of advice from various noise consultants. They've all advised that the external noise levels in the street are those that are typical for this sort of urban location. We first sought to discharge the condition in 2015. We again submitted an application to discharge in 2016, and that's what's before you at the moment. Of course, as Mr. Hammond has said, the condition was imposed in 2010. The British standard on noise has changed since then, and it recognises there are locations such as city centres where the guidelines, and they are guidelines, we should be clear about that, they're not absolute limits, they're guidelines. They may not be achievable, but it's desirable that development is not prevented, and this is a highly sustainable location, entirely the sort of location where the standard envisages some flexibility being shown. And specifically with regards to smaller balconies in these locations, the guidance says the specification of noise limits is not necessarily appropriate, and noise limits should not be necessary. So in terms of the design of the development, the initial advice that Hill received was that winter gardens would be likely to be required on Great Northern Road in order to achieve 50 decibels. The 50 decibel limit, that was clear at the outset. We were also advised that winter gardens on the frontage wouldn't be acceptable from a design perspective. So it was clear to us that those fully enclosed winter gardens wouldn't achieve permission. We could at that stage have opted not to include any private external amenity space on the frontage of those units, because the council has no policy and no standards requiring private external amenity space. However, we took the decision that it was better to proceed with a development that gave people the chance to use some outside external amenity space, rather than not providing it at all. As officers say at 819, the development provides an acceptable living environment and the standard of amenity, and it is compliant with the development plan. The condition is not necessary as it serves no planning purpose, and therefore the application should be permitted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Robertson.
Actually, Councillor Simmons is going to be
I'll go first.
Councillor Simmons.
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah. Well, I actually forgot my notes that I've written, so I've got some things scribbled down here. I'm absolutely struck by the difference between the statement here from a resident who eloquently put forward the human realities that are in play in Great Northern Road, and the stark mechanical almost measurements which the representative from Hill speaks about. Even whatever guidelines say, that road in comparison to the height of the buildings is incredibly narrow, and it is the main thoroughfare to the station. So of course the traffic is going to be dreadful, of course the fumes are going to be dreadful, and of course the noise levels are going to be dreadful. I can't understand, and Chair, I'm going to address you, I cannot understand why the comments of the Environmental Health Officer, the advice of the Environmental Health Officer was disregarded. And I note that the Environmental Health Officer's advice in relation to this current application is that more information is required before that condition is lifted. But the Environmental Health Officer at the original application spoke about the mitigation measures of those winter gardens and advised that they were put in place, and they were not. I have no idea about whether they were acceptable in design terms. I haven't been involved that closely at that time. But I don't think they came to planning committee and for a perusal. The call for this cap to be lifted presupposes that the conditions won't change, and it seems to me that we are set for more growth in the city. So it seems to me that the conditions as they are at the moment in that area will only get worse to a point where mitigation will become an absolute essentiality. Moreover, we've got trains now are on the point of running from Cambridge North to Brighton via Gatwick, which will relieve the pressures around Central Station. Also, the direct trains to King's Cross and Stansted are in the offing. So, and then we have another station opening at Cambridge South. Both of those stations and the services offered by those stations will reduce the demand, the level of traffic coming into Central Station, I would suggest. But whether or not breaches continue or not, a cap should remain, in my opinion. The residents in Great Northern Road are enduring terrible conditions, and to mitigate those conditions should remain an aspiration, at the very least, should remain an aspiration. But all measures should be taken to improve, and I don't believe reducing the cap would do so.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. When the residents of Great Northern Road moved into their flats, they did so with the benefit of Condition 33, which is the one that you're being asked to remove. That required the developer to provide primary external leisure or amenity space with outdoor noise levels not exceeding 50 decibels. Condition 33 identifies rear gardens and balconies as primary external leisure or amenity space. So I reject the idea that these are not part of the amenity space. These balconies are not part of the amenity space of the residents. They are, and Condition 33 recognised they would be. The developer was warned several times of the importance of the potential noise problem, but chose to do nothing about it. They've said that they felt it wasn't as important as the design. They even managed to get permission for an extra floor to be added to one of the blocks, which is added to the canyon effect of the street and must have exacerbated the noise problem. During the pre-application discussions and within formal responses, the Environmental Health Officer advised that the balconies of the residential blocks would require careful acoustic mitigation to achieve the 50 decibel limit. And that they most likely would require winter gardens or acoustic shielding. But as you've heard, this was not incorporated into the design, and subsequent acoustic assessments have concluded that the balcony noise levels would not achieve 50 decibels as predicted. The British standard has been addressed by the Environmental Health Officer in the report you've got in front of you, and advised that 55 decibels would be acceptable in noisier environments, but its recommended values are not achievable in all circumstances. However, the guidance advises that the development should be designed to achieve the lowest practical levels in these external amenity spaces. Acoustic mitigation will be required if these figures cannot be achieved to attain the lowest practical level. In the report in January, the Environmental Health Officer added to this and stated that the community space regularly frequented by occupants for relaxation or dining would not be expected to achieve the recommended noise levels. However, the balconies that are subject to this planning application are large enough to contain table and chairs. They're not small balconies for drying clothes or growing potted plants. They are capable of being used as amenity space, and they are actually used by amenity space, as you've heard from the resident. It was the recommendation of the Environmental Health Officer that the external amenity noise levels should be relevant for balconies of this size, and that is keeping them below 55 or below. Having had talked to several of the residents, I would add that people responsible for marketing the flats also identified the balconies as part of the living space and as a selling point in their literature. The residents confirmed that. Two ways of directly reducing noise have been put forward: either turning the balconies into winter gardens or fitting acoustic panels on the ceilings of the balconies. If you turned it into a winter garden, that would be totally enclosing the balcony, and that would be inappropriate because in summer the residents have told me that they need to have a draft through their flats because of overheating problems in the building. However, the acoustic panels in the ceilings of the balconies could be fitted, and I don't understand why the developers haven't even offered to do that, because at least it would have some mitigating effect. I visited several of the residents of Great Northern Road, and many stated that they felt that more should also have been tried by the developer to reduce the source of the noise as well as mitigating its impact. As far as I'm aware, they have not sought to have the traffic diverted elsewhere or have a quieter form of tarmac laid down. There are forms of tarmac which produce less noise when the cars drive over them, but this has not been tried yet. The speed bumps have been referred to as being noisy versions of the speed bumps we have in Cambridge. They could be mitigated and changed in their design. The applicant also makes a big issue of the alternative external amenity space. And sorry, I'm repeating myself here. The amenity space behind the flats is public open space and cannot be equated to the amenity space on the balcony of a flat. It's just completely different amenities. One is open to the public generally, and one is an extension of the living space in the flat. It really should not be confused. So I believe the applicant does not consider that condition 33 is necessary due to the lack of practical mitigation measures. Well, they haven't tried them. They haven't actually proposed to try and reduce the outside noise or to mitigate the noise in the balconies. And they should do. Mitigation measures do exist, and if the committee is minded to accept removal of condition 33, at the very least there should be a condition that the acoustic panels should be installed in the ceilings of the balconies. This would actually have an impact on reducing the decibel level. As has been explained, as the committee probably is aware, decibels are on an exponential scale, not a linear scale. So for every 10 decibels increase, that's a 100% increase in noise. Or so from 50 to 60 decibels would be a doubling of the noise. From 50 to 65 would be a 200% increase. So these noise levels are very pertinent and need to be addressed. They cannot just be swept under the carpet. Finally, I've got two issues to raise with the committee. One is a planning appeal on noise, which addressed noise in the Knutsford area, which was submitted to the council officers yesterday by the Cambridge Residents Association. This decision overturned dismissed an appeal to in Cambridge, Chesterton. Sorry, it's in the area around Knutsford in Cheshire East Council is the one I'm looking at. Sorry. In this decision, the planning officer, the planning inspector, recognised that trying to create sealed environment for living in was not acceptable. The sealed box solution should be seen as a last resort. An unacceptable noise environment should be dependent on not opening windows. He also made the point that although it could be claimed that people choose where they go to live, that's not always the case. And in this instance, we have the example where people have bought into a flat on the basis of a noise reduction requirement which is not being addressed. Not all future residents would necessarily have the choice. For example, some of the affordable housing occupants Great Northern Road has a large number of affordable housing occupants. They have very limited choice as to where they live, and so the argument about choice is not valid. I think that the officers should tell us whether this planning application, this report on an appeal decision, should have been taken into account in forming their conclusions to the report. And I think that at the very least a deferral of the decision may be necessary. There is also another reason for a deferral which the committee needs to address, and something I only just heard about this morning. And that is that the list of residences which were notified of this planning application to remove the noise condition was limited to only 3 or 4 flats in Great Northern Road. The vast majority of the people notified were in Ravensworth Gardens because of a mistake that appears to have been made by the council officers in notifying the residents on the outside of the flats, but not the flats themselves. I'm sorry that this has only just recently come to light. If I had known about it, I would have raised it before now. But I think the committee need to consider whether the proper procedures have been carried out and defer the matter if necessary. So to conclude, I think the matter should be deferred to take into account the appeal decision, to reflect on whether the correct people were notified of the application, and if those things have both turned down, I do think the mitigation measures should be still endorsed and applied to the flats. I'll hand it over to you to discuss.